The Arctic wind howled across the frozen expanse of Siberia, a relentless force that gnawed at even the sturdiest of shelters. Dr. Elena Kovalenko stood at the edge of the excavation site, her breath a steady plume of mist. The mining operations equipment buzzed and churned in the distance, struggling to carve into the frostbitten earth. Beneath her heavy parka, she clutched a tablet displaying the latest geological scans. The readings made no sense. "This is impossible," she muttered, narrowing her eyes at the holographic projection. The scans showed a structure, geometric, deliberate, buried nearly 2 miles beneath the permafrost. No natural formation could explain it. "Doc," a voice called from behind. Elena turned to see Victor, the site foreman, stomping through the snow. His face was a mixture of skepticism and unease. "You need to see this for yourself. We've hit something." The phrase lingered ominously. Elena followed Victor to the excavation pit, her boots crunching against the ice-crusted ground. The site was a chaos of activity. Miners hauling tools, engineers shouting orders, and a low hum of dread beneath their words. At the center of it all was the anomaly, a massive black obelisk protruding from the earth, its surface smooth as glass. It wasn't just its size that was unsettling. It was the way it seemed to absorb the light around it, casting no reflection or shadow. Strange, faint symbols flickered across its surface, their green glow pulsating like the heartbeat of something alive. "What the hell is it?" Victor asked, his usual bravado replaced by a nervous tremor. Elena stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached out with a gloved finger. "It's not natural, that's for sure. But this is beyond anything we've ever." A sudden scream pierced the air. All eyes turned to one of the miners, Sergei, who had collapsed near the base of the obelisk. He writhed in the snow, clutching his head as a guttural moan escaped his lips. His eyes were wide but unfocused, and his mouth moved in frantic murmurs, words that no one understood. "Get back!" Victor barked, pulling Elena away as 2 medics rushed in. They tried to lift Sergei, but his body convulsed violently. His voice grew louder, the incoherent muttering giving way to a single phrase, repeated over and over. "They're watching. They're watching. They're watching." With a final shudder, Sergei fell silent, his body limp in the medic's arms. The only sound was the howling wind, as though the earth itself mourned. Elena knelt by Sergei's lifeless form, her mind racing. She glanced back at the obelisk, its symbols pulsating in slow, deliberate rhythm. They were different now, shifting patterns that seemed almost reactive. "This wasn't an accident," she said softly. "What do you mean?" Victor asked, his voice low. "I've seen markings like these before, not exactly, but similar enough. They're warnings. Whoever, or whatever, made this wanted to keep people away." The foreman frowned. "Well, they did a lousy job because the corporation's already buzzing about this thing. They want a full analysis by the end of the week. Think you can figure it out?" Elena hesitated. The obelisk felt ancient, alien, and far beyond her understanding. But the scientist in her couldn't resist the challenge. "I'll need access to every piece of data you've collected so far. Scans, samples, everything." "Done," Victor said. "But if you ask me, we should bury this thing and pretend we never saw it." As night fell over the site, the temperature plummeted further. Elena sat alone in her makeshift lab, poring over fragments of translated symbols. The patterns were maddeningly complex, like fractals folding in on themselves. Yet one phrase emerged, clear and chilling. "Those who disturb the silence will awaken the abyss." A sudden chill ran down her spine, unrelated to the Arctic cold. She glanced at her tablet, then out the window toward the excavation site, where the obelisk loomed like a sentinel of forgotten nightmares. Her thoughts were interrupted by a crackling noise over the radio. Victor's voice came through, strained and urgent. "Elena, you need to come back to the pit. Now." She grabbed her coat and rushed into the night, her boots slipping on the ice as she sprinted toward the site. When she arrived, the scene was even more chaotic than before. A crowd of miners stood at the edge of the pit, staring down in stunned silence. "What's going on?" she demanded. Victor pointed wordlessly. The obelisk had risen, no longer half-buried. The structure now stood fully exposed, towering over the pit like a monolith from another world. The ground around it was cracked and blackened, as if scorched by some unseen force. As Elena stared, the pulsating symbols grew brighter, their rhythm quickening. A low, vibrating hum filled the air, resonating deep in her chest. "Elena," Victor whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise. "What have we done?" The obelisk emitted a final, piercing tone, and then silence. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, pressing against the ears and stifling the breath. Elena's instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to move. In that silence, a faint whisper emerged, coming not from the obelisk, but from within her own mind. "You should have stayed away." Elena's heart pounded as the symbols flared brighter, casting an eerie green glow across the frozen landscape. Whatever lay beneath the ice had been awakened, and it was only the beginning. The air inside the mobile command center was stifling despite the sub-zero temperatures outside. Dr. Elena Kovalenko stood at the edge of a holographic table displaying the obelisk structure. Beside her, the hastily assembled expedition team exchanged uneasy glances. None of them looked ready, but it was too late to turn back. "This is suicide," muttered Samir Patel, the team's xenobiologist, his voice thick with dread. "We barely understand what this thing is. Now we're walking into it." "We're not walking in blind," retorted Evan Morales, the corporate representative. His tone was clipped, his patience worn thin. "We have the best equipment, the best people, and a mission to figure out how this whatever it is can benefit humanity. Or your shareholders," Elena said under her breath. Evan shot her a glare, but let it pass. "The point is, we need answers. Quickly." Elena looked around the room. Samir was pale, clutching a tablet as though it were a lifeline. Lieutenant Kara Reed, leading the armed security detail, exuded confidence, though her eyes betrayed the same unease that everyone felt. Then there was Calder, the AI technician, who barely glanced up from his console. His role was to operate and interpret Athena, a sentient artificial intelligence designed for decoding alien languages and complex systems. "Listen," Elena began, her voice steady. "Whatever this thing is, it's not friendly. Sergei's death wasn't random. And those symbols," she pointed to the holographic display, which pulsed faintly with green light. "They're warnings. The obelisk is a threshold to something far older and more dangerous than we can imagine. Which is why you're here, Dr. Kovalenko," Evans said. "To make sense of it. Now, are we ready to proceed?" No one answered, but the silence was answer enough. The descent into the obelisk began at dawn. The structure had changed overnight, revealing an opening at its base, a dark, yawning maw that exhaled a faint warmth into the frozen air. A ramp spiraled downward, its surface smooth and unnaturally black. "Doesn't reflect light," Calder muttered, scanning the material with a handheld device. "Absorbs almost everything. This stuff shouldn't exist." The team stepped cautiously inside, the glow of their headlamps swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The walls were lined with intricate patterns that shifted and rippled as they passed, as though alive. Elena ran her gloved hand across one of the patterns, feeling a faint vibration beneath her fingers. "Organic and mechanical," Samir whispered, his voice trembling. "This isn't just a structure. It's alive. Stay focused," Lieutenant Reed ordered, her rifle raised and scanning the corridor ahead. Deeper they went, the air growing heavier with every step. The faint hum that had emanated from the obelisk outside grew louder, resonating in their chests. It was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like a pulse that didn't belong in this world. After what felt like hours, they reached a vast chamber. The walls here were different, covered not in shifting patterns, but in symbols etched deep into the material, glowing faintly. At the center of the chamber was a console that resembled a tree, its branches twisting upward into nothingness. Beneath it lay rows of capsules, each containing a humanoid figure suspended in a translucent substance. "They look ancient," Samir whispered, stepping closer to one of the capsules. The figures were tall and gaunt, with elongated skulls and glowing veins that traced patterns beneath their pale, translucent skin. Their eyes were closed, their faces unnervingly serene. "Guardians," Elena murmured, staring at the symbols etched on the walls. "They're guardians? What are they guarding?" Reed asked, her voice tense. Elena stepped toward the console, the symbols shifting as she approached. "This isn't a tomb. It's a prison." At her words, the hum in the air shifted. The light in the chamber dimmed, and the symbols on the walls flared brighter. Athena, the AI, spoke through Calder's tablet, her voice calm but mechanical. "Warning, energy levels increasing. Proximity to central console unadvised." Evan ignored the warning, moving past Elena to inspect the console. "This must be the control mechanism. If we can access it." "Don't touch it," Elena snapped, grabbing his arm. "It's why we're here." He shot back, wrenching free. The moment his hand grazed the console, the chamber trembled violently. The symbols on the walls began to spiral outward, converging on the console in rapid, chaotic sequences. The capsules around them flickered, their occupants twitching as though in response. "What's happening?" Reed barked, her grip tightening on her weapon. Athena's voice crackled through Calder's tablet. "Dimensional instability detected. Probability of containment breach, 87%. "Containment breach?" Samir echoed, his voice rising in panic. Elena stared at the console, her mind racing. "The symbols, they're trying to warn us. This prison wasn't meant to be opened. Whatever's in here, it's not just dangerous. It's catastrophic." The tremors grew worse, the floor beneath them splitting to reveal a chasm of pulsating light. Shapes began to emerge from the darkness below, shifting and amorphous, their forms defying logic. They were not creatures but manifestations of something far worse. Concepts given form, nightmares made flesh. "Open fire!" Reed shouted, and her team unleashed a volley of bullets into the approaching entities. The projectiles passed through them harmlessly, dissipating like ripples in water. Evan staggered back from the console, his face pale. "What the hell is this?" "The beginning of the end," Elena said grimly. She turned to Calder. "Can Athena shut this down?" Calder's fingers flew across his tablet. "She's analyzing, but this system it's rewriting itself faster than she can decode." Elena's gaze fell on the capsules. The Guardians' faces were contorted now, their serene expressions replaced by silent screams. She realized the truth in a sudden, horrifying flash. "They're trying to hold it back," she said. "Whatever's down there, they're the seal." The chamber erupted in chaos as one of the entities lunged forward, its amorphous tendrils engulfing a security officer. He vanished without a sound, leaving only the faint smell of ozone behind. "Fall back," Reed ordered, her voice cutting through the din. As the team retreated toward the ramp, Elena glanced back at the console. The symbols were spiraling faster now, the walls pulsing like a beating heart. The whisper she had heard before returned, louder and clearer. "You cannot escape. You must choose silence or annihilation." The team reached the ramp, the tremors nearly throwing them off their feet. The chamber behind them seemed to fold in on itself, the entities swarming toward the capsules in a frenzy. Elena's legs burned as she climbed, her mind racing with the implications of what they had unleashed. When they finally reached the surface, the obelisk's hum fell silent, and the entrance sealed behind them. "What just happened?" Evan demanded, his voice shaking. Elena looked at him, her face pale. "We woke something up, and now we have to figure out how to stop it." The cold was different now. It wasn't the biting chill of Siberia's frozen expanse, but something deeper, primordial, invasive. The wind howled, carrying with it faint whispers that gnawed at the edges of the team's sanity. Dr. Elena Kovalenko paced inside the command center, her mind a storm of fragmented thoughts. The obelisk stood silent in the distance, its smooth surface betraying no hint of the horrors it had unleashed. "We need answers," Victor said, breaking the tense silence. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his usual bravado replaced by a deep furrow in his brow. "What do we bring back with us?" Elena gestured to the holographic projection of the obelisk's inner workings, which pulsed faintly. The obelisk isn't just a structure, it's a mechanism. A lock. The entities inside are not alive in the way we understand. They're concepts, forces, and the guardians in those capsules? They were the ones keeping the lock intact. Well, the lock's broken, Lieutenant Reed said, her tone clipped. Those things down there aren't staying put. Calder, seated at his console, glanced up nervously. Athena's been analyzing the data. The obelisk is sending signals, frequencies that don't match anything on Earth. It's like it's calling out? Calling out? Evan Morales snapped, his voice rising. To what? Elena's expression darkened. Not to what? To who? The room fell silent. Athena's voice cut through the tension, calm but chilling. Incoming data indicates that external entities are responding to the signal. Probable extraterrestrial origin. Estimated time to arrival, 72 hours. Evan slammed his hand on the table. You mean this thing's a beacon? And now we're inviting more of whatever this is? It was never meant to be activated, Elena said. The Guardians created it to contain the abyss. But now that it's broken, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The sudden blaring of alarms jolted everyone. A red light bathed the room, and the sound of gunfire echoed from outside. Perimeter breach, a voice shouted over the radio. Unidentified entities. Visual confirmation impossible. Reed was already moving. Stay here, she barked, leading her security team out of the command center. Elena, Victor, Evan, and Calder crowded around a monitor displaying the external feeds. The cameras showed the excavation site, but the footage was distorted, as though the air itself was warping. Shapes moved within the static, shifting, amorphous forms that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. They're spreading, Elena whispered. The abyss is leaking into our world. The team watched in horror as one of the entities enveloped a security officer. His screams were short-lived, his body disintegrating into particles of light that dissolved into the air. We have to leave, Victor said, his voice trembling. Evacuate, blow the site, whatever it takes to stop this. Elena shook her head. If we leave, it'll spread unchecked. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the planet. Evan turned to Calder. What about Athena? Can she stop the signal? Calder hesitated. She's trying to interface with the obelisk, but it's like trying to decode an entirely new language. The more she learns, the more the system evolves. Athena's voice interrupted again. Analysis update. The obelisk's energy signature is destabilizing local reality. Immediate action required to prevent total collapse. Local reality? Victor asked, his voice rising. It means our world is breaking apart, Elena said, her voice low. Outside, Reed's team was locked in a losing battle. Bullets passed harmlessly through the entities, which seemed to absorb the energy and grow stronger. One by one, her team fell, their screams swallowed by the unrelenting wind. Reed retreated to the command center, slamming the door behind her. Blood streaked her face, and her breath came in ragged gasps. We can't fight them, she said. Conventional weapons are useless. Evan ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. Then what the hell do we do? We contain it, Elena said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Contain it? Reed snapped. With what? Elena pointed to the holographic projection. The obelisk isn't just a lock, it's also a key. If we can reverse the signal, we might be able to seal the breach. But we'll need to interface directly with the system. Calder frowned. Directly? That's suicide. The system is rewriting itself constantly. Even Athena's struggling to keep up. It's the only chance we have, Elena said. The obelisk responds to organic presence. That's why it reacted to us in the first place. Evan stared at her, realization dawning. You're saying someone has to go back down there? She nodded. And manually trigger the reversal sequence? The room fell silent again, the weight of her words sinking in. I'll go, Reed said, her voice firm. No, Elena said. This is my responsibility. I'm the one who deciphered the symbols. I'm the only one who has a chance of understanding the interface. Victor stepped forward. You can't do this alone. If you go, I'm coming with you. Elena met his gaze, seeing the resolve in his eyes. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "If this is the end of the world, I'm not sitting it out." Evan opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. He looked at Elena, then at the monitor displaying the chaos outside. "Fine," he said, "but if this doesn't work..." "It will," Elena said, though her voice wavered. "It has to." As Elena and Victor prepared to descend back into the obelisk, the remaining team worked to stabilize the command center. Athena continued her analysis, her mechanical voice providing updates that grew increasingly dire. "The signal strength is increasing," Calder said. "If we don't shut it down soon, we won't have a world left to save." Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself. The whispers had returned, faint but insistent, clawing at the edges of her mind. She glanced at Victor, who gave her a reassuring nod. "We're going to fix this," he said. As they stepped into the cold once more, the obelisk loomed ahead, a silent, alien monolith against the unforgiving Siberian sky. Its symbols glowed brighter now, pulsating in time with the growing hum. Elena tightened her grip on the data tablet, her heart pounding. Whatever awaited them inside, she knew it would test the limits of her courage and her sanity. And if they failed, humanity's last chapter would be written in silence. The third section concludes with the team preparing for a desperate final attempt to reverse the disaster, raising the stakes for the story's climax. Would you like to proceed with Section 4? The obelisk loomed like a monument to despair, its dark surface absorbing the faint glow of the auroras above. Elena and Victor approached its sealed entrance, their breath visible in the icy air. The symbols etched into its surface flared with increasing intensity, their alien geometry pulsating like a heartbeat. "This is madness," Victor muttered, his gloved hand gripping the hilt of his survival knife. A useless token against the entities they'd encountered. Elena, clutching the tablet loaded with Athena's hastily programmed algorithms, glanced at him. "Madness or not, it's all we have." As if sensing their intent, the obelisk shifted. A deep groan echoed across the tundra, and the entrance unsealed with a slow, agonizing motion. The darkness within seemed almost sentient, beckoning them forward. "Stay close," Elena said, stepping into the abyss. Victor followed without a word, his resolve steeling with each step. The descent was more harrowing than before. The ramp spiraled downward, and the walls around them seemed alive, their shifting patterns creating an almost hypnotic effect. The air grew heavier, charged with an oppressive energy that seemed to press against their skulls. Elena's tablet buzzed with activity. Athena's voice broke through the static. "Warning, dimensional instability at critical levels. Temporal distortions detected." "Define temporal distortions," Victor said, his voice tight. "Local time anomalies," Athena replied. "Past, present, and potential futures converging. Prolonged exposure may result in psychological degradation or corporeal instability." Victor grunted. "Fantastic." The chamber came into view, more chaotic than before. The capsules that once held the Guardians were shattered, their occupants gone. The console at the center was ablaze with energy, the symbols spiraling outward in maddening patterns. The air shimmered with the presence of the entities, formless, writhing masses that defied comprehension. Elena stepped toward the console, her every instinct screaming at her to stop. The whispers returned, louder now, their fragmented words clawing at her mind. Silence or annihilation? She shook her head, focusing on the tablet. "Athena, initiate the reversal sequence." "Processing," Athena said. "Interface established. Sequence will require manual input." Elena's fingers flew across the tablet, her eyes scanning the symbols that shifted and changed in real time. "It's rewriting itself faster than we can adapt. I'll have to override it manually." Victor moved to stand beside her, his eyes scanning the room. The entities were closing in, their forms flickering like shadows cast by an unseen fire. "They're not going to let us finish this," he said. "I know," Elena replied, her voice strained. A sudden roar reverberated through the chamber, and one of the entities lunged forward. Victor reacted instinctively, swinging his knife. The blade passed through the creature harmlessly, but the movement bought Elena a few precious seconds. "Keep them off me," she shouted. Victor nodded, his breath coming in short bursts as he fought against the encroaching entities. Each movement felt futile, but he refused to stop. Elena's hands trembled as she entered the final sequence. The console's energy surged, and the chamber trembled violently. The whispers intensified, their words now coherent. "You cannot contain what was never meant to be bound." Elena gritted her teeth, her voice shaking as she replied aloud. "We can try." The console flared, its symbols converging into a single, blinding point of light. The entities recoiled, their forms distorting as if in pain. Victor shielded his eyes, his ears ringing with the otherworldly wail that filled the chamber. "Elena," he shouted. "What's happening?" "The system's fighting back," she yelled, sweat dripping down her face despite the cold. "But it's working. The reversal's holding." The light from the console expanded, engulfing the room in a blinding radiance. The entities screamed in unison, their forms collapsing into themselves. The walls of the chamber shuddered, their shifting patterns slowing until they became still. Elena collapsed to her knees, her vision swimming. The whispers were gone, replaced by an eerie silence. "Did we do it?" Victor asked, his voice hoarse. Elena looked up at the console, which now pulsed faintly, its energy stabilized. "I think so. The breach is sealed." Athena's voice chimed in, calm and measured. Containment restored. Signal deactivated. Dimensional stability re-established. Elena let out a shaky breath, tears welling in her eyes. "It's over." The return to the surface felt unreal. The obelisk was silent now, its ominous hum replaced by an almost serene stillness. The team that remained, Reed, Calder, and a handful of surviving security personnel, stood waiting, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. "Did you fix it?" Reed asked, her rifle slung over her shoulder. Elena nodded. "The breach is sealed. For now. For now." Evan Morales asked, stepping forward. Elena met his gaze. "The obelisk is a prison, but it's also a warning. Whatever was inside is not gone. It's just contained, and it's not the only one of its kind." Evan's face paled. "There are more?" Elena nodded. "We've only scratched the surface of what's out there. If this one woke up, others might too." The weight of her words settled over the group like a shroud. "What do we do now?" Calder asked. Elena looked out at the frozen landscape, the auroras dancing faintly in the distance. "We prepare, we learn, and we make sure this never happens again." The group stood in silence, the enormity of their task sinking in. The obelisk loomed behind them, its surface dark and featureless once more. But Elena knew the truth. The silence was only temporary. The abyss was patient, and it was waiting,